Welcome to the Tin Dog Podcast. In this episode I'll be mostly talking about the Third Doctor's time. Now the Third Doctor was played by Jon Pertwee from 1970 to 1974 when he's replaced by Tom Baker. Now Jon Pertwee for me is one of my favourite Doctors, mainly because I actually met him. Not met him in the convention sense where you turn up, queue for about an hour, get an autograph and then leave. But I actually met him and I went to his house. Now, the short version of the story is I was after a voiceover for an animation I was working on, and I needed someone with a very distinctive and quite haunting voice to speak the words of the Edgar Allan Poe poem, The City Beneath the Sea. I wrote to several people, and Jon Pertwee wrote back saying that he would be delighted to do the voice over for free, which he didn't have to do, and all we had to do was turn up at his house on a certain day and do the recording. I was enormously nervous, and drove all the way to London, passed my driving test, was going to drive all the way to London, but in fact I got the train instead, met my friend who drove us across London, because he was from there, and we went to Mr. Pertwee's house. It was absolutely terrifying, but he was charm itself, put us all instantly at ease, and we set about recording. We spent a couple of hours in his presence, and we talked about Doctor Who, Wurzel Gummidge and everything, and it's a day that will stay with me for a very long time. While I was there, he recorded 2 soundtracks for me. The first one was The Chief Detective Henry King by Hilaire Belloc, which I have a recording of, and the other one was The City Beneath the Sea. I made The Chief Detective Henry King while at university, using plasticine, or as the Americans like to call it, claymation. The other recording, City Beneath the Sea, I still have, and one day intend making Jon Pertwee's very last film. It was on the day I was making The Chief Detective Henry King that somebody came into the studio at the university, tapped on the door, said, "Sorry to interrupt, but I just thought you should know, it's just been on the radio that Jon Pertwee's just died." And I must admit, that did kind of put a cloud on the whole day. Anyway, let's not talk about his death. Let's talk about his time as the Third Doctor. Now, the Third Doctor's time is one of the ones that actually gets repeated on UK Gold and across the world. It was one of the first ones to truly be sold as a product to the rest of the world, mainly because it was in colour, as opposed to the First and Second Doctor's time, which was, of course, in black and white. The Third Doctor's first story, due to some sort of industrial action, was made on film. The working of the film by the Resurrection team, I'm sure they're not called the Resurrection team, but you know what I mean, not easier, but more noticeable. The quality of the story is variable, but it does bear some striking resemblance to the same story as Rose, which is why it would be my first recommendation. You've seen Gallifrey at the end of the Second Doctor's time. Of course, I'm not completely sure it's been named by this point, but it is the Doctor's home planet. And then into Spearhead from Space, which of course introduces the Autons as well. You've got colour, which to be fair, the colour was very heavily used in this period. The first story, Spearhead from Space, moves on from that to the only story with a very odd title. Now, there's a whole issue, which I'm sure I'll cover a podcast on at some point, of what is the Doctor's real name? Is he called the Doctor? In the title sequence, it was called Doctor Who for a very long time. Now, if you notice, Tennant says the Doctor. But it wasn't until Tom Baker's time where it actually said the Doctor, played by Tom Baker. For a long time, it was Doctor Who. Now, this story, the second one of Pertwee's time, is actually called Doctor Who and the Silurians, which does throw a lot of people into a bit of a spin. But then again, the Silurians would be incorrectly named anyway. That is corrected later on, which just confuses everyone anyway. The Silurians is a very nice moral tale, again a little long, but ideal for watching. The shaky-headed Silurians needing a little bit of a pinch of salt. But then again, if you throw yourself into the story, you do have a whole "they were here before us, in fact they've got more of a right than us" storyline. It's very nice, and it shows UNIT up to be what they are. Now, Ambassadors of Death is one of those odd stories where the colour version of this story has been lost, so its release was obviously delayed on VHS and DVD and the like. But it sometimes appears on UK Gold, and I'm sure it appears around the world. Ambassadors of Death is kind of to do with a trip to Mars, but not really. It's a little heavy going, to be honest, but it does actually benefit from being in black and white, and it becomes very atmospheric. Now, Ambassadors of Death is followed by one of my all-time favourite Pertwee stories, and a lot of people's favourites, Inferno. It's got far too many parts. It does have a whole alternative universe thing, so if you enjoyed the alternative universe Tyler family Cyberman story, it is worth having a look. But of course, this version of the alternative universe, there's no actual baddie in this story, which of course makes it quite a nice Doctor Who story. Of course, there's the megalomaniac who just needs a nice chat and possibly a cup of tea, but on the face of it, it is quite a nice tale. I would recommend Inferno. Don't really want to say much about it, except it is based on a project to mine the Earth's core, and of course that ends with hilarious results. And of course this time, rather than the Doctor saving the universe, well, anyway, we'll leave it there. It's got some very nice effects. However, one of the things I would recommend is when the Doctor travels from one parallel universe to the other, you turn the sound down and put the Jimi Hendrix track, any Jimi Hendrix track, but Purple Haze on. Sounds really good, and it looks great. It looks like it was meant to be played on top of this. And of course it contains the best Inspector Morse impression by Jon Pertwee, which is when he goes, "There's been a murder, Liz." Absolutely fantastic. Then you've got Terror of the Autons, which is kind of a retread of Spearhead from Space. This is the next season, colours kicking in a lot more, which is odd because it's followed by Mind of Evil, a very nice portrayal by the Master. Of course, I've not mentioned the Master at this point. Now, the Master at this point is played by Roger Delgado. For a lot of people, he's the best Master. Of course, a lot of people grew up in the 80s, where they have a completely different Anthony Ainley Master. But if you like to think of them all as the same person, you've got a very nice continuity of character. Roger Delgado's portrayal was fabulous because in real life he was just a gentleman who preferred his slippers. But you just don't get that from the characterization. You get the menace. It's as if his game raises everybody else's game in the show. Now, of course, his first appearance is in Terror of the Autons, which hence the retread of the Spearhead of Space storyline. But he does bring a whole extra level to it. Now, Mind of Evil, where it's the Master's the villain again, there is a bit of a theme all the way through the entire Third Doctor's time where I wonder who the villain is. Oh, it's the Master. What a complete surprise. But the Mind of Evil's a great story. Again, the prints only exist in black and white, so it's not shown as often as the others. But story-wise, it kind of is gripping. Admittedly, some of the effects haven't borne up with time that well. But it's based around a prison, it's based around mind control, it's got some very nice themes, and of course, the Doctor does show a lot of his past. It's kind of a Pertwee time had by all. Oh, also the Brigadier who steps in at the last moment to save everyone, well, doesn't exactly come as a surprise, is it? It's hardly a spoiler. It does show UNIT to be much more active and more intelligent than have been put forward by other stories. Mind of Evil's followed by the Claws of Axos. And this is where we kind of hit the ground running, because the Master, again, the villain, kind of teams up with this other race of aliens called the Axons, obviously, who are here to bring us, universal power and loveliness, where in fact they're evil. What a surprise! The original story was called The Space Vampires, kind of gives the game away. It is well worth seeing. It's worthy of note that the Axon costume in its natural form was sprayed green years later and reused as a completely different Doctor Who monster by Tom Baker's time. After that, we've got the incredibly long, reasonably boring Colony in Space. I wouldn't recommend that at all. I would skip it and go straight on to one of my favourite stories again, The Demons. Absolutely lovely story. Again, some of the episodes only exist, some of the colour episodes only existed in America, so that they recorded on Betamax, so when they were transferred back into English, after a lot of working, it basically looks like each cell's been coloured in using a crayon. Don't let that put you off at all. It's a lovely story. I would recommend it for anyone who is a fan of the demon creature storyline from this current new series. Definitely recommend having a look at that one. The effects are to such a high standard when it comes to Doctor Who that in fact somebody did phone in and complain and say, well, I would like the BBC not to blow up a church. When you watch it now, it's quite obvious the church is a model about 2 foot long, but it's still quite well done. Admittedly, some of the CSO work is dodgy, but then again, it always is at this time. It's cutting edge technology. So, the Demons takes us after Day of the Daleks. The Daleks are back for no adequately explored reason. Now, I always get confused between Day of the Daleks and Planet of the Daleks, mainly because the only difference is day and planet. Now, Day of the Daleks is, well, I don't really want to put too fine a point on it. It's the same plot as Terminator. Only instead of having Skynet, you've got the Daleks. Guy travels back in time to prevent World War III. Oddly, he might happen to cause it. Don't really want to push it more than that. The Daleks don't do much in this story. The villains are the future. It's time. The Ogrons are in it, however. They're quite good. I do think they could do with a nice return to the new series. Let's face it, they'd be better than those little robots that keep appearing every Christmas. After Day of the Daleks, you've got Curse of Peladon. Now, a lot of people make a big thing about the Peladon stories being allegories for miners' strike or going at the European Union. I can't really see that. All I can see is men in hockey skirts wandering around being odd. It does have one of the younger Troughtons in it, which is well worth seeing. They're not great stories. They do have the Ice Warriors in, which make a nice return, but the Ice Warriors have gone all Star Trek. They've all got, societies. They're not just villains. They're not just monsters. It does have one of the world's most embarrassing Alpha Centauri aliens. I don't really want to talk about it. I'll leave that for you to discover when you finally get around to watching the story. After the Peladon story, we come to the story that was on the day I was born. Episode 2 of the Sea Devils. The Sea Devils is very, very similar in storyline to the Silurian story, and of course they are meant to be related character-wise. However, I actually prefer the Sea Devils, and again, of course, the Sea Devils have hitched up with, yes, you've guessed it, the Master. What a complete surprise. Definitely recommend the Sea Devils. Wouldn't recommend the Mutants that comes after it. And the Time Monster, well, for a long time, let's face it, the Time Monster was voted as worst story ever. Of course, it has now to compete with Love and Monsters and Time Lash. But for a long time, a lot of people really didn't like this story. They were wrong. It's not as bad as you make out. However, it is followed by The Three Doctors. Definite recommendation. Because, of course, it's the first time there's ever a multi-doctor story. I say multi-doctor. Only the second and third Doctors really appear together on screen. The first Doctor, sadly, William, was unwell. And now, according to some books, it was filmed in a studio somewhere, and other books say that it was filmed, his segments, however, were filmed in his garage. Now, if it was his garage, it was very well shot, because you just can't tell. Logically, I would say a studio, but you just don't know. The Three Doctors is well worth a look. You get a lot more Time Lord mythology. You get to see the place. Admittedly, Gallifrey does look like air traffic control, but that's not a bad thing. Omega, lovely bit of shouting, nice bit of CSO work. Admittedly, the whole we deal in black holes, kind of suspect, but there's so much mythology in the Three Doctors that it really is worth a look. Carnival of Monsters is a great way of following the Three Doctors. This is classic Doctor Who. Carnival of Monsters has got some lovely setups. It's got at least 3 parallel storylines which come together in a way that does surprise you. So you've got Carnival of Monsters, followed by the rather dull Frontier in Space and Planet of the Daleks. I say those two together because, to be honest, they do fit together, making what could only be described as a really, really long story. Planet of the Daleks does make some fantastic use of toy Daleks that you can buy in the shops. It's not a fabulous story, but if you're a Dalek completist and you want to know what's happening, why not? There's a lovely Dalek invasion force. As, of course, we come near the end of his time, we've got the Green Death. Now, most people who've seen Doctor Who in passing do know the Green Death as the one with the maggots, as Mel and Sue so lovely put. The Green Death's a great story. It's got a fantastic ending for Jo. That's Jo, the Doctor's companion, who's been with the show, since the Autons. Of course, I haven't mentioned the companions at all. We start with Liz and then Joe, and we finish with Sarah. Sarah appears in The Time Warrior. That's the first time that the Sontarans appear. And of course it's got Dot Cotton out of EastEnders in it, and the bloke out of Boone. Time Warrior is a very nice story because you've got alien invasion happening in the medieval times. I'm going to use the medieval times because anyone who knows me knows that I'd rather be a bit more specific than that. Invasion of the Dinosaurs. As UK Gold once said, Invasion of the Dinosaurs, Doctor Who, 20 years before Jurassic Park. Unfortunately, 20 years before Jurassic Park, and with the budget of a small shoebox, you've got dinosaurs that really are just a bit shit. However, that's not a problem because the storyline's great. Scotty Martin Jarvis is back, and the bloke out of Genesis of the Daleks. Yes, it's very nice. Invasion of the Dinosaurs is well worth a look, but don't try and use that to try and convince people. We're into the last 3 stories now. We've got Death to the Daleks. Yes, and of course the final Peladon. These have all got Sarah Jane Smith. There'll be more of Sarah Jane Smith next time. However, the last story of the Pertwee era, I would recommend seeing this just to experience it and to experience the loss, is Planet of the Spiders. Ignore the wobbly spiders. Apparently there is a myth that these spiders were used in this story originally were so frightening they had to be removed. I doubt this enormously. Planet of the Spiders is well worth a look because at the very end he regenerates into Tom Baker. If you'd like to contact me and ask me any questions about specific stories in this podcast, please email me at tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk or leave a review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. Speak to you soon. And the new series is just around the corner.